Hi, everyone. We're just going to give folks a few extra seconds to join, and then we will kick off the webinar. Alrighty, well, welcome all to have logged into our new tips and tricks webinar series hosted by Qualio. Before we get started, this webinar will be recorded and we will share a link to the recording via email after the webinar is completed. A quick reminder to please ensure you are on mute, and if anyone has any questions, please enter them into the QA panel. We will answer as many as we go, and then at the end, answer as many as we can in the time allowed. But we will provide all answers and questions on the Help Center article that we will have at this webinar recording and will be shared with you later today or tomorrow. For today's agenda, we will kick off with introductions to design controls, permissions, and how to obtain access. Next, we'll walk through how to add your product, setting up your requirement levels, test cases, and associated risks for each product. Thirdly, we will touch on the data migration process and linking to external evidence, and then wrap up with a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Some quick introductions on your host for today. Dave, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jess. Good morning, folks. David is my name. I'm one of the product specialists here at Qualio. I've been working with Qualio since 2017, and in that time, I've helped to onboard over 100 customers. I continue to support 400 plus customers that we have today in their day-to-day usage. But my primary role today is really around onboarding and implementation of new features here at Qualio.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Jessica, and I'm a customer success manager at Qualio. Prior to joining the Qualio, I worked at a few SaaS companies, and while working directly with a few customers, I learned that the problem of maintaining quality is a pain point for the industry. I observed how a SaaS solution can solve some of the most challenging problems for quality management, and that's why I joined Qualio 2 years ago, and now enjoy working with customers like you to help you grow and get the most out of your EQMS. Before we jump right in, what is Qualio? For those of you who may be new users of Qualio or those that need a refresher, Qualio is the #1 cloud-based quality management system for life sciences. Our CEO had a vision for life science companies, and that was to assist them to bring their products to market faster with an easy-to-use solution that focused on a quality-centric approach. With the right solution, putting quality at the forefront of an organization should make things easier and more efficient, and that's why more than 400 life science companies and healthcare businesses trust Qualio to optimize and automate their quality management system. The story doesn't stop there. Qualio's platform is scalable and its software is flexible so that as your business grows, it not only meets your business requirements, but your quality requirements as well. Before we get into today's webinar and discuss tips for getting started with design controls, I wanted to let everyone know that we have a related webinar coming up later this week, where we will discuss how to get your medical device product to market faster, specifically in the EU market. If you're interested in registering for that webinar, we will provide the registration link at the end of the session today. Great, so let's jump into an introduction on design controls. I will turn it over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Jess. So the first thing to understand is what the various tools within Qualio, what those tools will help you achieve. So today we're going to start with a brief introduction. Now, this is Qualio, your cloud-based quality management system. As it's cloud-based, you won't need to download or install anything. Once you've accepted the email invitation to your Qualio account and completed the setup of your user profile, all you need to do is open your preferred browser, navigate to app.qualio.com, and log in using your email address and password. Once you log in, you will land on your personalized dashboard. And from there, you can navigate through to the rest of the application. This is my dashboard, and at the top of the screen, we can see the navigation bar. There we can see the various features and tools that Qualio provides. Documents and training are the core features. Events, design controls, and suppliers are built on top of documents, and they support certain pre- and post-market activities. Now, documents is where you can generate and control documentation. And with that, it contains a workspace that provides quality users access to every document at every stage in the document lifecycle. The library provides all users access to what is currently released or effective. Now, design controls is a tool primarily used to develop new products. There is no limit to the number of products that you can develop. Design controls provides product development and quality teams a cloud-based environment to asynchronously develop product requirements, to verify and validate product requirements, and to assess those requirements for risk, as well as releasing product documentation upon approval. Now, each product has its own dashboard, and there the quality person is notified about changes made to a product's design elements. Now, when we talk about design elements, we refer to product requirements, any V&V test cases, and any associated risks. Now, as you add or modify requirements or risks, they will populate on the product dashboard. And from there, the quality person can initiate the approval process to generate product documentation. Excuse me. Now we can see that on this slide. Here we can see 2 design elements have been added or modified. And these elements are getting flagged for the quality person managing the dashboard. We can see that the verification test is new. So it has the design control status of new, and the design input requirement is changed. So this indicates that this requirement has been modified since it was last approved. So both this new element and this modified element are getting flagged for that quality person or the person managing the dashboard. Now, this next slide illustrates the product documentation generated and housed within design controls. These files are populated with the requirements, test cases, test results, and any associated risks generated and approved in design controls. Documentation such as design and development plans, verification and validation plans, risk management files, design history files, technical files, that sort of documentation will be housed on the Qualio documents side. So now we're back in the document space, and this slide is an example of some of the product development related documentation that will reside on the documents side of Qualio. Other examples include, again, design development plans, verification and validation plans, and other documentation that comprise things like your design history file or technical file. Now, on this next slide, this is an example of a design history file document in Qualio. So we are back on the documents space. The type of document or the template used in this case is a design history file index. Now, as you can see, this DHF is an index of documents and records generated per phase of development. And in each phase or section, we reference or link out to those documents and records. So we're just going to take a minute for a quick poll. Jess, I'll give the floor back to you.
Thanks, Dave. To get things warmed up, I have our first poll question of the day. Alrighty, do your products conform to one of the following categories? Is it a physical medical device, software as a medical device, both 1 and 2, or something else? Give us just a few more extra seconds to vote.
We're getting a lot of good responses.
Yep. Alrighty, it looks like we have our poll results in already. So it looks like the majority was a physical medical device.
Super. Today's content will suit that particular industry better. Don't worry though, there's still some content that will suit SAMD or combo as well.
Awesome.
I think we have another slide or another poll.
All right, for our second poll question of the day, in terms of product development, are you actively, sorry, let me just pull up the polls. Sorry, guys. All right, in terms of product development, are you actively preparing for a regulatory submission, an audit, a go-to-market product, something else, or none of the above? All right, just a few more moments to vote. Alrighty, it looks like we have our poll results in. Looks like majority selected a regulatory submission. Alrighty, great polling results, and thank you for your participation.
It's great to see that sort of thing. Like, I'm hopeful that the content today will support you in those submissions, help you get ready to go to market. If there's anything after today's webinar that you still feel uncertain about, do reach out to us. Let us know if there's any other questions. Of course, we'll have the Q&A at the end of the call, but we can always make time to go through anything specifically with each customer as well. So that brings us on to the next section then. So now we're going to talk about access to design controls and what each user role can do in design controls. Now, by default, design controls is inaccessible for new users. Design controls can be enabled for all users or a select few users at the request of the company. However, if we enable it for everyone in an account today, if anyone joined tomorrow, a separate request would have to be sent through for those new users. And Qualio can only grant access after a user accepts the invite. So when you invite someone, they'll start off in a sort of invitation pending state. We can only enable design controls after they accept their invite and complete setting up their user profile. Now, we are working towards getting this ability into the hands of the customers with the forthcoming admin user role. So I expect from middle of next year, potentially early next year, that an admin level user in each account will be able to manage who has access for each company. So for now, you'll have to send a request through to Qualio to gain access to design controls. But from the middle of next year, there will be an admin user that will be in each account that will be able to manage who has access. Now, if you change a user role, so for example, if you go from normal to quality or quality to normal, access will be removed. And you'll have to submit another request to have design controls enabled again. Now, if you are testing features, perhaps in a sandbox environment, instead of changing your user role, create a test user at each user level. So, you know, you're all I imagine you're all quality level users. If you wanted to test the functionality and see what it's like from the point of view of normal or basic, create a user role at that normal or basic level. And indeed, you might even want a second quality level user to test. Use a email address or set up an email address to create that additional user role in your sandbox environment. You know, user licenses are available at no cost for the sandbox environment. So if you do need more for your sandbox environment, let us know and we can get you set up. But email aliases are a great way to test at different user roles. So for example, an email alias is a new email address, but that email address feeds the same inbox as your main address. So from a testing point of view, you know, if you're testing email notifications and you're using multiple users, it's helpful if all notifications go to that one inbox as opposed to several inboxes. But if that's something you're interested in, do speak with your IT person about setting up email aliases. So now the next thing to talk about is how to request access to design controls. Now, when you are logged into Qualio, you'll be able to use the in-app chat. And when you go to send us a message using that in-app chat, you'll see a bunch of options. The first option that I've highlighted here is the option to request access to the features that are inaccessible by new users. So this is actually an old screenshot. Suppliers is available to everyone, but events and design controls are the main features, but they're not available for everyone when they start. Migration Manager is available when you're in onboarding, but we need to provide access, and then SSO or single sign-on if you want to kind of control who has access through a system like Azure DevOps or Okta or G Suite, whatever it might be. So that's access. Again, if you want access, if you Need access to design controls, perhaps you don't see it, pop a message in your in-app chat and the support team will be able to provide you with access or get you started in the onboarding process if you haven't already. Now, in terms of who can do what in design controls, as we've kind of discussed briefly so far, there are 3 different user roles in Qualio: quality, normal, and basic. The quality level user overall is the highest level user, and they have full access, including admin privileges. The normal user is like an assistant to the quality user with some write privileges, but no configuration or administrative privileges. The basic user is more or less a read-only user, but within design controls, they have no privileges. Use this information to determine how best to deploy your user licenses. If you assign a product manager a normal user license, that product manager will have to work with a quality user to create and configure a product, as well as approving and releasing the product documentation within design controls. Now, if you are considering assigning a quality user role or license to someone that is outside the quality team or document control team, the quality user has full access across the application. So that's something to be aware of if you are considering assigning a quality user to someone outside of quality or document control. Okay, so in this section now, we're going to talk a little bit about creating and configuring a product in design controls. Now, this is the model that we use to enable customers to develop, verify, and validate product requirements. There are up to 3 levels of requirement, and they are labeled user needs, design input, design output, with validation and verification test cases where applicable. Now, I have a short video here that will bring us through the actual creation process, but give me a moment while I just full screen that. Give myself enough time to kind of move these things around. I can close that poll now. Okay, so let's go through the steps to create a product. There are 4 steps to go through when creating a product. It's on the first step where you will assign a product name and identify the type of device. Here you can specify if it is a physical device, a software device, or combination. On the second step, this is where you're going to configure each level of requirement. You can have up to 3 levels of requirement, and by default, the labels applied are again, user need, design input, and design output. Additionally, here you can define the phases or statuses that you'll use to develop the product requirements. To demonstrate the options available for customization, I'm modifying some of the default options. As you can see here, I've modified, or you'll see in a moment, I will modify the prefix, the label, and I'll define my own statuses. You can use these statuses to identify where in the workflow process a requirement sits. For example, you might use statuses like backlog, selected for development, in progress, and done, or alternatively, you might use statuses such as draft, in progress, and done. And we'll take a look at how these statuses can be used later. So once you've completed that form, you can move on to the third step. And this is where you'll define the different levels of test cases for B&B. The level 1 test case will validate your user needs, and then your level 2 or level 3 test case will verify that your design outputs satisfy your design inputs. With the default configuration, the level 2 test case is enabled, and that will link to your level 2 requirement for design input. And as you can see again, I've modified some of the default options. I've adjusted the prefix, the label, and I've defined my own statuses. So now that I've completed this form, I can move on to the next and final stage, which is to configure how risk is assessed for this product. So this is the final step, and we are configuring our risk assessment policy. Now on this step, you can define your own risk prefix, risk label, and risk assessment statuses. There are 2 types of assessment form available. The first is based on the ISO standard 14971, and that's your hazard analysis. The second assessment form is for failure mode effect analysis. So you can see I've customized my risk assessment statuses. So next I'm going to move on to configure my hazard analysis assessment form. The first thing to do here is to define the levels of risk available, and then to specify which of those levels require mitigation. The system default offers 3 levels of risk: low, medium, and high, which we can see here. And only high-level risks require mitigation. So this is the default setting. If your assessment results in a low-level risk, that won't require mitigation, but these are, of course, customizable. Now, you can have a maximum of 4 risk levels. So if you wanted to define your hazard analysis in a way where you have a level of no risk and then low, medium, and high, and then perhaps no risk does not require mitigation, but then low, medium, and high will, you can absolutely set that up here this way. Another way, now I've only seen this in 1 or 2 regions, but if you wanted a risk level that was acceptable and not acceptable, you could have simply 2 levels of risk, and then the least critical level could be acceptable, that won't require mitigation, but then your second level is more critical, that will be unacceptable, and that will require mitigation. So once we define our risk levels and which of those levels require mitigation, we will move on to define which of those levels will result based on input for severity and probability. Now, on your hazard analysis form, your inputs for probability and severity are measured on a 5-point scale or a 3-point scale. By default, we use the 5-point scale or matrix, as we label it here. Once you've selected the appropriate scale or matrix, you can then customize the labels used at each point on that scale, but we'll stick with the defaults for now. So here we've selected the 5x5 matrix. So your criticality scale for severity, there are 5 labels: negligible, minor, serious, major, and critical. They are, of course, customizable, but we're going to stick with the defaults for now. And then for probability, there are 5 points on this scale: improbable, remote, occasional, probable, and frequent. Again, all of these labels are customizable. So now the next thing to do is to specify on this matrix, what of the above custom risk levels will result based on input for severity and probability. Now, the kind of default option here, there's several resulting in no risk. So that means that if you input severity of critical and probability of improbable, that will be no risk and wouldn't require mitigation. That doesn't look right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to adjust or reconfigure this matrix. So I'll specify what should be low, what should be medium, and what should be high. So now a severity input of critical and probability of frequent will result in a high level of risk, and that will require risk control measures. So that brings me to the end of the configuration screen for my hazard analysis. In the next section, we're going to configure the assessment form for failure mode effect analysis. With your FMEA form, you are estimating severity, probability of occurrence, and detectability. Now, to record your estimates or to capture your scores for severity, occurrence, and detectability, the user will provide a response on a scale of 1 up to 10. Now, to specify that, you can enable that scale on this configuration screen. So scaling for severity, occurrence, and detectability, the highest number you can input here is 10. So if you wanted to capture scores, maybe 1 for detectability, 5 for occurrence, 8 for severity, you'd have to specify at least up to 8, but you can go up as high as 10. But maybe you just capture these responses on a scale of 1 to 5. You can specify 1 to 5 here. But then the next thing to define is, what resulting risk scores require mitigation. To determine what that score is, your inputs for severity, occurrence, and detectability are multiplied. So if you input severity of 1, occurrence of 2, detectability of 1, that's a score of 2. All 3 values are multiplied together. But then it's in the next field that you can define that threshold. So, if you're measuring on a scale of 1 to 5, Perhaps your threshold is 10. So with that, any resulting score above 10 will require mitigation, but anything below 10 won't require mitigation. And that's it. That's my product created. I've gotten to the end of my risk form or my risk configuration form. So I've proceeded to the next screen, which brings me to the product that I've just created. Now, if I ever need to adjust that configuration, I can always make those adjustments by going back to my configuration screen through the configure button in the top right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the statuses we have available for my requirements. I'm going to reduce the number available. And instead of what we see on screen, I'm simply going to use draft, in progress, and done. And that's it. I've now reconfigured my product. So creating and configuring a product is quite simple, and you can always go back to adjust any of the configuration that you have set up. Okay, that brings me to the end of the video. We're now going to move on to the next slide. There we go. So on this slide, we can see an illustration of where those statuses we kept talking about, where those statuses will display. So right now we're back on the product dashboard. And here we can see a number of design elements. We can see a risk, a test case, and a product requirement. The design control status for each item is new, and that indicates that these are net new design elements. That design control status is automatically populated by the system itself. However, the status field that we have highlighted here requires manual input on the individual design elements. And the options available to select are the statuses that we define on that configuration screen we just saw. Okay, so that brings me on to the next section, which is to migrate design control or product development data to Qualio. Now, if you are migrating to design controls, the data that we can bring into design controls is specifically product requirements, associated V&V test cases, and any associated risk. In terms of product requirements, you may have already begun to document your product requirements, and they may live as like a spreadsheet or a Word document. So to bring those into Qualio, you'll need to create and configure a product first. Once that product has been created and configured, you can then begin to populate the product requirement and risk data. This is a manual process as there is no import function. It is possible to integrate with certain third-party systems such as Jira or Azure DevOps, like if you're developing software, and if you're working in one of those systems, we can pull in the requirements that you have already developed. But if you are working in Excel or Word, we unfortunately do not have an import option available. Now, in terms of requirements, you might need to add more details, or you might need to merge certain fields. For example, if you have already begun to develop a requirements trace matrix, that matrix might have more or less fields when compared to the number of fields in our form. So the challenge lies in determining what content to port where. The title field on our form allows you to summarize the requirement, test case, or indeed risk, whereas the description field allows you to record all other relevant details. So in the foreground, we can see our form, and in the background, we can see a sample trace matrix. Now, not every field on that matrix is going to get copied over into our form. And there might be a sort of translation or migration required to capture all the relevant data. So for example, in column C here, what's labeled as requirements description, to me, this looks more like a title. So in this case, I would take the value from this cell and put it into the title field. And then in my description field, I might add a little bit more. I might expand or elaborate on this. But then in this case, I might bring in business need justification, project objective, or whatever other relevant fields should be brought into that description field. Now, when it comes to risk assessment, again, you have two types of assessment form available. And the first is based on the ISO standard 14971. That's your hazard analysis. The second is for failure mode effect analysis. In your hazard analysis, you are estimating probability and severity. However, there is only one estimate for probability. We do not have an option for two estimates of probability or two scores. In your FMEA, you are estimating severity, occurrence, and detectability. Detectability is only available on the FMEA form and is not available or not part of the hazard analysis form. So they're just items to be aware of if you are considering migrating data to design controls. Sometimes I've seen where the process for hazard analysis and FMEA sort of married, and sometimes we see a sort of merged approach coming through. So with that, you might need to consider how best to maybe reformat or migrate the data into design controls. Okay, so we've discussed migrating requirements, test cases, and risk. What about everything else? Things like your design history file, technical file, risk management file, and their constituent documents, they should migrate to Qualio documents. So these sorts of records can be housed and live, shall we say, on the documents side of Qualio. If you have already developed a DHF, maybe you've completed the development process and you're wondering how best to bring that into Qualio, I would suggest taking advantage of the migration manager, simply because it has a bulk approval option. So if you're migrating a bunch of records that have already been approved, maybe there's 100, 200, depending on the complexity of your product. Sorry, excuse me, folks. Let me just mute that. So if you already have a DHF and you're wondering how best to migrate that into Qualio, the quickest route really will be through the migration manager, and that will migrate those files to the documents side of Qualio. Before you use the migration manager, you will need to configure the document templates required to migrate each type of record. If you have any questions about the migration manager, do feel free to pop a question into the in-app chat outside of this discussion. Now, on the topic of DHF, I'm going to give the floor back to Jess to take a quick poll.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave.
No problem.
All right, so here's our last poll question of the day. All right, what format do you currently use for your design history file? Is it an index style in a single record, a full detailed compilation of all relevant activities, software tool that links to design history file evidence, something else, or no format, total mess? We'll give people a few more moments to vote. Yep. All righty. And looks like the majority here was no format, complete mess. All right.
Interesting. So, adopting an EQMS is a great opportunity to straighten things out. It's not uncommon for someone adopting an EQMS to take the opportunity to, really get everything aligned. And that brings me neatly on to just an example of a design history file, what you can do with Qualio. Again, this is going to be back on the Qualio document side. It's not going to be in design controls. It's a document template, and the type we've selected is design history file index. Now, on that template, there is a section per phase of development. And in each section, we have a table that maps out what will be delivered or generated as part of each phase of development. And the idea is, as you complete each phase of development, you can come back here and reference or link to those various deliverables that have been generated. So that was a very quick example. Again, your DHF is back on the Qualio documents side. That brings me on to my last topic. So before we conclude, I just want to quickly talk about linking to evidence created outside of design controls. So specifically, if you're, for example, creating a design output and you need to reference maybe a part specification, a component specification, or a drawing, the form that you use to document your design output or your requirements, you'll see I have highlighted there is an insert link option. So with this option, it's not like what you might be familiar with on the document side. It's not like you can @ SOP1. With this, it's the more traditional hyperlink. So what we do here, I've typed out the reference PS12 or part specification 12, and then I'm going to use the insert link tool to embed the URL that will point to that Qualio document. So my part specification is a Qualio document. On that part specification, we might have CAD files, we might have an actual image or PDF attached. And then we're going to link or point to that part specification from this design output. In terms of testing, then, if you're creating maybe a verification test case and you need to reference the protocols or reports, or if you do it all in one document, the protocol and report, you can take the same approach. So you can see here, I have typed in the reference for my validation and verification protocol and report. So this is a Qualio document. I've highlighted that piece of text, and now I'm using the insert link tool to embed the URL that points to that document. So to link to evidence created outside of design controls, you can use this insert link tool, and you can point to a Qualio document, or you can point to something outside of Qualio altogether. Now, in the future, these forms will have an option to attach files. That option will be available by the end of this year. So that brings me to an end. We got through all this in just under 40 minutes. Jess, I'll give it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. So let's kick off the QA session. Looks like we already have a few questions in the panel.
So yeah, there's one there that I'd like to start with, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Expand this. So there's a question there about validation. Do we need to validate the design module before we can use it or grant it to users? So from a regulatory point of view, you need to be able to demonstrate that you validated any tool or feature prior to implementation. So in terms of generating records, you really should validate the tool prior to implementation. So before you start generating any records, ensure that it's validated prior to implementation. Now, you may already have access in your sandbox, that's fine. The sandbox is a great space to test any piece of functionality within design controls. The sandbox is separate from the main account, so it has its own separate audit trail. But with that, you can generate as many test records in your sandbox as you need. It's not your production environment. It's not what you'll be extracting information from in an audit. So in an audit, you'll need to be able to demonstrate that you have validated the tool prior to implementation. Now, in terms of validation, we have taken a new approach for design controls. In short, Qualio is the performer of the tests and the customer is the verifier. We have automated the testing of the requirements that we have mapped out, and the customer simply verifies our results. By way of evidence, we provide screen recordings, a divided screen recording. On one side, you see the script that is automating the protocol, and on the other side of the screen, you will see the user interface being interacted with. So if you would like to begin using design controls, we can upload those validation records into your Qualio account. So it would be myself, actually. I would go in, I would create a Qualio document, upload our records, and route them to yourself or the designated person for approval. If that's something you're interested in, either pop a message in the in-app chat after today's call or reach out to your customer success manager. Unless you have my email address, feel free to reach out to me directly. So that was around validation. Let me just have a quick look here.
Alrighty, looks like one popped up. Once you create one product, can you use that as a template for other similar products? Is that?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, we can't do that. Each product is configured independently of each other, and we don't have a sort of cookie cutter approach, not yet at least. And with that, then any data generated within a product is contained within that product.
Awesome.
And there's another question there, just to looking to demonstrate a trace matrix for all user needs. So the trace matrix is a trace matrix of all requirements into test cases. It wouldn't just be user needs unless you're in the first phase of development. So if you're in the first phase of development, you may only have user needs. So when you release them through design controls, the trace matrix that design controls will generate will only contain user needs. But as you progress through the different phases of development, you will get to a point where you'll have a much more fleshed out trace matrix. But give me one moment. I'm just going to pull up some of the samples that I have to hand. Oh, I think I might need to adjust my screen share. Sorry, give me one moment. I'll do this really quickly. Desktop 2. So these are some of the outputs from a product in one of our internal accounts. So I'm going to start with the trace matrix. Oh, it's on my other screen. I'll just go back over here. So this is the system generated trace matrix. As you'll see, there are fields for each level of requirement and each level of test case. So, in your first phase of development, you may only have, you might not even have user needs until the very end, even design inputs. But at the end of that phase 1 of development, you will release the user needs, or you will approve the user needs and design inputs through design controls. So you'll have a completed review form that will provide a sort of snapshot in time of what was approved at the end of that phase of development. So that trace matrix will contain just potentially user needs or design inputs, but then maybe in the second phase of development, you go on to develop design output. So then the release or the review form from that second phase of development will have a second trace matrix. And that trace matrix will show you what was released or approved at that point. So this trace matrix was developed much later in this product's development. As you can see, we've done no validation or human factors validation yet, so that's still pending. But at this point, we are testing all of our requirements. And then just to round that off, so that is the trace matrix. What I will show you now is the specification document that Qualio generates. So you'll get one specification document per level of requirement. You'll get a user need specification, design input specification, and a design output specification. This is the user need specification document for one of our demo products, the Kessel Smart Pump. And this is the format that data will be delivered in. I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. We have one more. Will basic users eventually have access to design controls in the future?
Unfortunately not. Basic users are more or less a read-only type of user. So in documents, the basic user can train on documents. In events, a basic user can initiate an event. So let's say you have a sales team or a customer service team, and they are on the front line dealing with prospects and customers. They're gathering feedback, maybe complaints. So that user can initiate feedback or a complaint in design controls. So, you can assign like your salesperson or CS person a basic user license so that all that information can be captured. That's the only sort of privilege that a basic user has. They can sign off on training and documents. They can initiate an issue in events, but they can't do anything in design controls, and I'm not sure about suppliers.
Awesome. And then one more question I see here is there a way to assign priority to a requirement?
So
I think that's a feature request, Dave.
Like to assign priority, I'd be curious to know about the context behind that. Like, is it a case of you want to indicate to the team, this is a priority requirement, it needs to be developed. I'm not sure if that would be done on the Qualio side, but if it's okay, I might ask you to maybe submit that question with a bit more context, if you wouldn't mind, maybe to support@qualio.com, and then I can reach out to you just to explore that potential feature further.
Awesome. Well, I see a few more questions in the panel, but we are out of time here. Thank you everyone for your participation for today. Again, here is the registration link below for the upcoming webinar. Again, you will receive a link to the recording via email after the webinar is complete, and an informative article in the follow-up email. Thank you again, Dave, for your expertise today on the call, and thank you all for joining our Tips and Tricks webinar series. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Have a good day, folks.
Thanks.